Out of some 10-ish unrecognized countries around the world, half of them is backed up by Russia. Why is that? Well, let's find the answer. Hello Internet, welcome to Lex Universe. I think I know why I clicked on this video, but we will actually not really talk about the present, so if that's why we're here, I'm sorry. We will talk about the geopolitical situation of some unrecognized countries on the Russian borders. We will answer ourselves why they exist, how they came to exist, and eventually, what is the reason that Russia really needs these places. But before I begin, let me welcome all the new subscribers here. If you haven't subscribed yet, well, you can try this button here somewhere. I will divide this video into two sections. First of all, I will mention all of the quasi-states that do exist at the borders of the Russian Federation. I will give you a brief history and context for each one of them, and what can make a picture yourself, but you can see the length of this video, so I will not be able to dive deeply into details, so I will probably forget something. Well, if you want to add something towards this topic, write it down in the comments below. Also, if you have any opinion, and everybody has an opinion because everybody is suddenly a geopolitical or military expert, so I'm sure you have your opinions as well. You can write them down in the comments below. In the second part of the video, I will try to take some more, let's say, general approach, and I will try to answer the question why Russia creates all of these unrecognized quasi-states on its borders. So let me take it chronologically. We will start with the territory that's actually located inside the sovereignty of Moldova. It's a place called Transnistria. When you look at the map, you can see that Moldova is actually quite far away from Russia, actually like the whole length of Ukraine. So why is there a Russian unrecognized state within their borders? Well, if you look at the map or territorial divisions of the Soviet Union, you will see that Moldova was actually part of the Soviet Union, even though it has obviously really nothing to do with the Soviet Union or the Russians or so on. The majority of the population of Moldova, which back then was known as the Moldovan Soviet Socialist Republic, are Moldovan, which basically is Romanian. They share pretty much the same language. They have shared a long time in their history, and well, if it weren't for political divisions, they would probably be the one nation. Many Russians moved to the Moldovan Soviet Socialist Republic. They lived especially in the eastern part of the country. When the Soviet Union started to collapse in the beginning of the 1990s, well, this resulted in a problem, not only in Moldova, in many countries. I mean, the Russian minority is a problem in many countries that surround Russia at the moment. But here in Moldova, it was kind of difficult because, like I said, Moldova is basically one nation from Romania, and there were some fears from the Russian population of Moldova that the newly independent country would seek for the reunification with Romania. And so they rebelled. They declared their own independent republic, the Transnistrian Moldovan Socialist Republic. They were not recognized by anyone, and they were able to fight a war against the Moldovans because there was kind of a strong presence of Russian military personnel in the area. Well, eventually the war ended with a ceasefire. An unofficial border zone was created at the Dniester River, and right now Transnistria has acted as an independent country for the last 30 years. It hasn't been recognized by anyone, not even by Russia, even though they still keep their military presence. I don't know how this goes together, but like basic laws doesn't apply for Russia, obviously. They have their own currency, they have their own military, their own mafia, their own government, everything works in conjunction. They're very happy there. Well, considering it is unrecognized, obviously the Transnistrian passport is worth nothing. So many of these people also have like dual, triple, quadruple citizenships. Like 300,000 of these people actually also have Moldovan passport, because Moldova still considers them as the citizens of the republic, so they can apply for it. It's the kind of worm that I don't want to get into, but this is actually one of the ways how people in these unrecognized states can travel abroad, because the Transnistrian passport, as I mentioned, you can barely get to Russia with it. Moving on in time, we'll get to the Caucasus. And here I will mention two countries in the same time, because their history and their story is basically the same. It's the so-called Republic of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Ossetia, I had never learned how to pronounce it, I'm really sorry, but nobody from the country is listening to me anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter. Anyway, these two little quasi-states are still internationally recognized as being part of Georgia. The story is in Abkhazia and South Ossetia is quite different from what we saw in Transnistria and what we will see in the other Russian quasi-states. There was basically no Russian minority in these lands. But if you look at the demographic map of the Caucasus, you will see that's a clusterfuck of various nations that have absolutely nothing to do with each other, and in most cases they really hate each other. It's one of the most craziest areas in the world. But anyway, people living in Abkhazia are the Abkhaz people, and people living in the South Ossetia are the Ossetian people. We will get back to the point that one unknown person called the biggest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Back in the day, Georgia actually voted to leave the Soviet Union and to declare independence. People in these two regions, well, they didn't oppose it, they basically boycotted the independence referendum. So from that moment on, it was kind of obvious that they didn't want to be part of this. They both declared independence in the beginning of the 1990s and basically were doing their own business ever since. They still kind of were part of Georgia, meaning that Georgia still had some kind of I wouldn't say control, but they knew what was going there. It was possible to travel there, and many Georgians actually lived in these territories. In the span of the next 15 years or so, kind of a racial cleansing has been going on, and the Abkhaz and Ossetian people have been pushing the Georgian people from many offices, many public positions. It all escalated in 2008 when the Georgian president Saakashvili declared that Georgia must control 100% of its territory. Well, obviously nobody liked it in these regions because they wanted to do their own thing. And well, it escalated very quickly. They invited the Russian troops to their respective territories. And then obviously one of the most fearsome Pierce Corps arrived, and the Grand Red Army of a new age came. They occupied the entirety of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. They even got as far as to Gori, so they basically occupied half of Georgia. Then some peace talks were held. They withdrawn their forces back to Ossetia and Abkhazia, but they remained there ever since. It's basically impossible to get from Georgia to South Ossetia at the moment. They are very unfriendly against each other, and not to mention that the border zone is expanding. Like, people are being pushed away from South Ossetia. That's how Russia intensifies its influence on the region. It is generally possible to get to Abkhazia, but it's illegal from the international and Georgian way, so if you ever want to visit these two areas, you need to apply for the permission from the Georgian government. But anyway, Georgia hasn't controlled these territories since 2008, and they are doing basically their own thing. As opposed to Transnistria, they do not have their own currency. They're basically just using the ruble, although now they probably can use just monopoly money and it will be the same. They do not really use their own passports. Many of the people living in these areas are receiving Russian passports, or since they are still considered citizens of Georgia, the Georgian government actually does issue the so-called neutral passport document, which is given to these people, and it is generally recognized by some countries as legal documentation for crossing borders. The next three sort of states, I will mention them all within one block because they actually were created in the same manner. There are some differences, I will mention them, but we will now of course talk about the so-called Republic of Crimea and the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. There is certain difference between these. We all remember how they came to be, and I will mention it a bit later. But before I do, I will point out Crimea a little bit more, because right now, from the Russian point of view, Crimea is part of the Russian Federations, while these two quasi-republics in Donbass are not. They didn't accept them into the Russian Federation yet. Maybe they never will, hard to say. But once I will mention all this, you will probably see why Vladimir Putin and the Russian government felt that Crimea was a lot better acceptable and obvious for the Russian view to become part of Russia, while the Donbass didn't. So let's talk about Crimea first. Crimea has been part of the Russian Empire since, I want to say, some 17th century. If you haven't seen the movie about Catherine the Great, well, go watch it, it's quite good. But yeah, during her rule, Crimea was conquered, and ever since it was part of the Russian Empire. It was reconquered by the Bolsheviks after the Russian Civil War in 1920. It was actually the last remnant of the whites, or the anti-Bolsheviks, in Russia, in the European continent. They fled. Ever since then, it was part of the Russian Socialist Federative Soviet Republic, or whatever it was called. And while it has remained under their control, well, let's skip Hitler. And then in 1954, something changed. The Soviet government, under the leadership of Nikita Khrushchev, has declared, given Crimea, or the Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic of Crimea, to Ukraine. Back at the time, it really didn't mean anything because the whole country, all 15 Soviet Socialist republics, have been united and strongly led by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. They didn't have any kind of autonomy, so that really doesn't mean a thing. Why he gave Crimea to Ukraine, there are several theories. Some of them are very pro-Khrushchev, that were telling that he really liked Ukraine, not to mention his wife was from Ukraine. The other theory is actually kind of anti-Khrushchev, because when they say that he gave Crimea to Ukraine because he didn't want to bother with this restoration after the damages from the Second World War, well, I don't know. No official explanation has ever been given. I personally think that he did it just because it kind of made sense. Crimea is not connected via land with Russia. it's connected with Ukraine and kind of really makes sense to be part of Ukraine. And since it didn't make any difference back then, well, kind of made sense. But actually, really, that really changed after the collapse of the Soviet Union, because all of a sudden Ukraine possessed almost all of the Russian harbors in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, and kind of inherited a very large Russian minority. Ukraine has kind of always been at the borders between Western Europe, or Europe in general, and Russia. Its name even means borderland. So when you look at Ukraine, it's always been kind of like divided west and east, since the eastern part was always more pro-Russian, while the western part was kind of really anti-Russian and more pro-West. And most of the election results were really close. In 2010, there were new elections where Yanukovych won, very narrowly actually. And after years where Ukraine was trying to move itself towards the West, he cancelled the European Union-Ukrainian cooperation agreement, and he wanted to become more allied with Russia. Well, majority of the people, especially in Kiev, didn't like it. They started protesting against it. Then the government tried to stop the protests, and they were quite bloody. That's what we today call the Euromaidan. We are at 2014. Yanukovych was forced out of the country. A new government was formed, and well, the country couldn't be divided more. Well, that was something like a birthday cake for Vladimir Putin, who decided that now was the time to listen to the pleas of the poor Russians in the eastern parts of Ukraine and change the geopolitical situation that's been here for the past 30 years, and that, according to him, was really wrecked. His armies entered Crimea, where a referendum was held to declare independence. Well, we all love going to the elections when there are army men in the streets and trying to very strongly suggest who you should vote for. Obviously, the referendum ended up by the pro-Russian rebels winning, obviously because the pro-Ukraine people either were scared to go to the referendum or didn't vote at all. Like, look at the Catalan referendum. Well, people from Spain who didn't believe it was a legal referendum, they obviously didn't go to vote. It's not so difficult to win at that point. So that happened. They declared independence, and a day later, guess what? They applied for the membership of the Russian Federation. They were accepted very quickly, and they became part of Russia. At least from the Russian point of view, the West and the majority of the world have never accepted this, and it will probably never happen. That's Crimea. Obviously, seeing that, many Russians, I don't want to say Russians because it really looks like I hate Russians, but these people who did this were like total terrorist bullshit. And I cannot find a name. Yeah, just some shitheads. Anyway, so they started fighting their legal governments, the local regional governments that were in the cities of Donetsk and Luhansk. They made a coup, and they captured some cities in the area that we usually call Donbass. It's basically two oblasts of the Republic of Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk. They were backed by the famous men in green who were members of the Russian army. Russia never accepted this, and strangely enough, for the next 8 years, never recognized the sovereignty of these republics. They have been trying to work on their own, but it's basically just a black hole in Europe. They do not have any international recognition due to the sanctions that have been imposed after their occupation. It's very difficult for anyone out there to have any kind of trade relations with the rest of the world. Not to mention, well, they are Soviet totalitarian military dictatorship of the worst kind. So, who would want to do business with them? Well, alright, that's the situation as it is right now. But why is that? Why has Russia this need to expand? Of all the countries, I mean, isn't it big enough? Well, obviously there are more reasons, and we will talk about all of them. Above all, I would first like to mention one. I believe it plays kind of a big role, and it's kind of in the general mindset of the Russian nation. They have gotten used to being kind of a superpower on the world stage, and ever since the 1990s their power has diminished significantly. Obviously they don't like it, so they are still trying to expand their will, and all of these little quasi-states that they are building around the world are just a byproduct in their attempt to trigger their own national pride. When we're talking about why Russia is doing this, I would divide the reasons into several categories. The first category would be military and politics. The other one, equally important, economic. Let's start with the geopolitics. When you look at Russia, what do you see? Look at the map. It's gigantic. You know, the size of Russia is the byproduct of its geography. When you look at the map, what you see are the giant plains of Siberia and also Eastern Europe. There are basically just 3 major mountain ranges in the whole territory of Russia, and obviously if you want to invade, it's not such a difficult job to do. So if you are a Russian emperor and you want to prevent that, what you're gonna do is you will just keep expanding. They were trying to increase the territory that you have in Europe, where they obviously expected any kind of attack from, to make it as deep for the invader so that it's not realistically possible to invade the country using conventional weapons. Saying that, you are moving eastward, and then suddenly you'll end up in Chukotka and you have nowhere else to go. But still, you have large plains of Siberia that are basically not possible to invade, but the main point is this large portion of their country is basically empty. The absolute majority of all the people living in Russia, and when I say the absolute majority, I really mean it, like really some 80-90%, lives in the European part of Russia, which is still gigantic for the European measures, but it would be a lot easier to invade. So Russia has been kind of paranoid in this case, and they've been expecting an attack from the West ever since the known history, and it kind of makes sense because all of the attacks, except for the Mongols, came from the West. So they are trying to push the boundaries of the Russian sphere of influence, or their borders in general, as west as they can. That was the whole idea behind the satellite buffer zone created after the Second World War. Well, they have left it, they have lost it, and right now they barely keep control of Belarus. So they are trying to push the boundaries to the west. We can see it now in 2022, but even the previous attempts were of the same idea. Well, that's the geopolitics, but let's talk about the economy. Here, the geography of Russia is to blame again. Let's look at the map of Russia again. So what we see again is the giant plains of Siberia. There is a lot of space there, but you cannot really live there, can you? So in that case, when you look at the Russian geography or the population centers, most of them are located in Europe, in the European part of Russia, and especially in the southern part of the European Russia, and then along the southern borders of Russia, because what can you do out there? There's no agriculture in the Siberian. There are some mining towns, but that's basically it. Who would want to live there? It was kind of the idea behind the Soviet Union that was really spanning southwards, not only to the west. When we talk about the climate and geography of Russia, the next point is kind of important, and that brings me back to Crimea. Why was Crimea important? And well, again, look at the map. Russia has a very long coastline, but majority of it is really pointless. It's located in the Arctic, and well, you cannot really build any large harbors there. So one thing that Russia has always been missing, and that's one of the things that they have been really trying to get. That's one of the reasons why they rented Sevastopol from Ukraine after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's the warm water harbor. Some link to the international shipping lanes that does connect Russia with the rest of the world. They don't have to deal with it anymore because they stopped being part of this world. But in the beginning, this also played kind of a large role, because what you have there, you have St. Petersburg, you have Kaliningrad, both of which are not ice-free the whole year. And then you have Vladivostok, like cool, but also not the best thing. Not to mention, it really takes a long time to get the goods from the European part of Russia to Vladivostok. So in this case, the coastline of the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea are perfect for Russia. So Russia's been expanding their sphere of influence in the past 30 years quite extensively, creating pretense proxy wars and frozen Soviet Union conflicts all around the place. And maybe it's time to say stop. So hopefully we'll make it work. Speaking of which, Slava Ukraine. And if you found this video interesting, go check out my channel, give me a subscribe, and I have some other educational videos, travel vlogs. If that's what you're interested in, go check it out, and I'll see you next time, hopefully.